I'm here, or not here, to talk to you about some rootkit work that I've done. The main purpose of this talk is to talk about Tron, the Shadow Walker implementation that basically cloaks userland memory. And then there's a couple other rootkits and an IDA plugin that will help to obfuscate and hide a debugger while you reverse engineer code. But first, I think it's probably important to talk about why no one's at the podium. So this is a proof of concept talk. Basically, the idea is to prove that anonymous speech is now a technical possibility. There are some social difficulties that may or may not be a major, but we'll see. We'll evaluate that after the talk is over. So to make this real, make this more realistic, we're going to try to break the DMCA live and with just an active speech using a property of Tron. So the hope is that this sort of talk format may be useful for people who are researching DRM-related crypto or censored speech in the U.S. Whistleblowers, I believe, recently had their First Amendment rights taken away, at least at the federal level, by I think it was the Supreme Court. It's also useful to help spread awareness of privacy-enhancing technology. So let's have a look at the DMCA, at least the relevant section. It basically says, in pertinent part, that no person shall manufacture a component of any technology that either has limited commercially significant purpose other than to circumvent copyright protection, or is marketed by that person for use in circumventing copyright. So, I don't know, it seems like C would have First Amendment issues. Maybe there's some restrictions on First Amendment speech with respect to marketing, but it's definitely a huge gray area. So let's do it. Let's first talk about point B, I guess. Do free research tools have commercially significant purposes? Maybe, maybe not. Certainly Linux has commercially significant purposes. Lots of people use it in their products. But if you have a free research tool that may or may not take off, may or may not see significant use, is that commercially significant? That's not clear. So then what counts as marketing? Well, speech. How about, what if I just tell you guys the truth? It is a property of this memory cloaker that it can be used as a component to circumvent some copy protection scheme somewhere. So basically anything that relies on verifying copy protection of its code will do. All you have to do is jump past the copy protection code and then cloak that crack and then ship it with Tron, and that should work fine for anything that's doing like MD5s of copy protection code or whatever. Of course, there's better ways to do this than shipping a kernel driver with your wares, but it's a property of this thing. It can be done. Gotta ship the product, right? Put it on the bullet point. Put it on the feature list. All right. So we have a fair amount to cover. We have two rootkits that are useful as reverse engineering tools. A rootkit support library that includes a couple of interesting functions. We have one IDA plugin that uses Tron, the first rootkit, to set hidden software breakpoints in your code. And then we'll talk about how all this was done, how the talk setup went, and all of that. So I guess the goal of all this is debugger hiding and covert code userland code modification and instrumentation. So if you have something that's difficult to reverse engineer, that's trying to detect debugger, or trying to detect modifications or hooks in itself, the idea is that these tools will be useful to that end. So this has applications in malware research, working with beasts like Skype, DRM research, online games, what have you. The dual debugger trick presented at Black Hat was very innovative, but also a little bit of a hassle. Hopefully the IDA plugin will enable that to be done back in a single process again. And DRM research, I as an author am not liable if someone uses Tron to make a crack, I don't think. I mean, so long as I don't encourage them to do it and have a part in that, them doing it. But the DMCA does make the component or part thing kind of sticky. So, all right. So the first rootkit, Tron. Again, as I said, basically a Shadow Walker implementation, but made to work with userland memory. So it's going to hide various pages in userland memory and allow you to set permissions on them and make them appear to be something other than what they are. So let's do a quick recap of virtual memory and how this basically works. So virtual memory is handled by the memory management unit in your CPU, and it handles the translation from virtual addresses to physical addresses. Basically, these mappings are described in data structures called page tables, which are a three-level data structure that translates your virtual address to your ultimate physical address. And because of this three-level nature of it, there's an optimization that caches these translations temporarily called the translation look-aside buffers. There's actually two of these, one for instructions or code and one for data. There's also a distinction between global TLBs, the ones used by the kernel, and userland TLBs. The userland TLBs are switched every time there's a process switch, but not at thread switch. So here are the page tables. This is basically the layout of how a virtual address, referred to in the Intel literature as a linear address, is translated into a physical address. For your given process, you have a value loaded into CR3 that points to the base of your page directory. The first 10 bits of your virtual address are used to index into that page directory, and then that is used to get to the page table directory, which the middle 10 bits of your address are used to offset into that. Now, what's interesting here is in the last few bits of here, there's a bunch of status bits in this table entry. Most important to us is the valid bit right at the very end. But those bits are all ignored, and the top 20 of this, or at least for the purposes of address translation, are all ignored to obtain the base address. The top 20 are used to obtain a base physical address of a 4 kilobyte page. And the last 12 bits of your linear address are used to index into that page, and that basically gets you your ultimate physical address. Okay, so let's recap how Shadow Walker works. First off, you have, let's describe the idea of this page, the page fault handler, when it's called. It's called if your TLB lookup fails, so if your cache basically fails, and then the page table says that it's either not present, or the page table says that the page you can't write or can't execute in those last few bits of that PTE. That the NMU is what detects this and then calls your page fault handler. If all these conditions are satisfied, the page fault handler is not called at all. The TLB cache is just updated by the NMU and it traverses the page tables for you. So what Shadow Walker does is it marks the hidden pages as invalid and then has a custom hook on the page fault handler to basically put fake or valid data in the TLBs depending on the access type and the permissions for that data. So if basically the checks are if the instruction pointer of the faulting address is equal to or the faulting instruction address is equal to the faulting address, then you know you have a code access because it was your instruction that caused the fault, and you need to service that fault by caching the ITLB. And you do that basically by issuing a call to that page, or the page that you want to prime for that address. And then you issue a move to that, or you read from that page if it's not an instruction fault. So there are some limitations to Shadow Walker. This is not me. By no means is this meant to be like a knock of Sparks and Butler's work, but there were just some things it didn't do. It didn't handle writes. The write bit wasn't checked, and if you had copy on write memory or write protected memory, you entered into a page fault loop or a double fault, and you had a blue screen. There are also races in the multi-threaded environment. This was addressed in their FRAC article, and they had some scheme to get around that. In userland, it turns out it can be done a little bit cleaner. Also, there was no userland support at all. It was strictly for cloaking kernel pages. And in my opinion, they sort of looked at this the wrong way as far as this cache priming technique goes. I think it's better to think about this not in terms of ITLB versus DTLB, like a schism between the two caches, but instead you want to think of it as sort of a schism between your page tables and what's in the cache. So your fake data, which would be in the cache, and then the hidden data would actually be in those page tables. And then you can set up access permissions, and with this thought pattern, like an API basically just flows from this that enables code and data cloaking. And which I'll show you in a bit. Also, I didn't really find it I didn't find it that useful to hide rootkits. I mean, you're still hooking something. You're still hooking that page fault handler, and that can still be checked. You can still verify the code of the page fault handler. And in fact, PatchGuard is attempting to do this, but it turns out that some subtleties of the way PatchGuard works make it so that this doesn't really, or give you an opportunity, rather, to subvert it. So let's have a look at what hidden memory looks like. Let's think about this. So you've got, in the basic scenario that I've described so far, you do have this view. You have basically two views of a single virtual address range in userland. Notice the 7. So you can basically have your evil code in one view and then your normal code under the fake view. You also have the option to hide your evil code or evil data or your instrumentation or whatever with null cloak memory, meaning that it appears totally unmapped. If you try and access it, you get an access fault, and you basically can't detect it's there. So code permissions basically control who can access what data. And this is based on your instruction pointer, your current instruction pointer only. And so if you want to have like API calls, make API calls from allowed code, you actually have to give them permission as well, because I don't walk the stack in a page fault handler. That'd be just insane. So basically here in this diagram, you can see that allowed code is accessing the hidden, allowed to access the hidden memory, and then the other code is allowed to access the normal data. And then here in this null cloak scenario, you can actually have this self-allowed code that's allowed to access its own region of memory, and then fake memory appearing totally unmapped to everybody else. So the core Tron API. So all the APIs are implemented via a non-hijack of virtual alloc. So what does that mean? That basically means there are two roughly 32-bit keys that are handed to virtual alloc. Tron detects this in the kernel and says, okay, this is meant for me as opposed to the kernel, redirects it to one of these APIs. The idea is that you can control these nonces basically consist of a secret key that's your key to Tron and prevent people from being able to write detectors into their software that scan for these APIs. So you basically have an almost 64-bit secret key into Tron. And the APIs are as follows. You have an add cloak, which basically sets up basically sets up a cloaked range from start to end, backed or faked by this start to end range here. And you can do this out of process. The fake memory is actually copied into the kernel and allocated in the target process, so you can use your local stack, you can use heap and free it doesn't matter. And all the virtual locking and the copy on write elimination are done for you by this API. I should also note that start and end probably should be page aligned just to keep yourself sane, but the kernel will page align these for you. Then you also have remove cloak, which removes your cloak, eliminates any associated permissions that you set up below from that thing, and allocates any injected memory as well. So then you have the permissions APIs, which basically provide you with a range of code that is allowed to access a range of cloak. These addresses need not be page aligned, but the cloaks, again, probably should be page aligned to keep yourself sane. And then remove allowed will remove that range of allowed code. And you don't have to worry about cleaning up a process exit. I hooked a ZW terminate process, and that eliminates all your cloaks as soon as the process exits, and they're also double checked to be removed when Tron is unloaded. Oops. Okay, so we have here's a core usage example, which should be the craziest looking diagram so far. You have on this side, you have allowed code between A1 and A2. This is the left side in case mouse pointer isn't working. Should be between A1 and A2 is going to be allowed to access your evil code over here. The evil code is allowed to access itself, and then other code is going to be given unmapped memory. And this is all done with just 3 API calls. You include the Tron header file. You add the cloak between C1 and C2, saying that it's going to be backed by null memory. And then you add allowed between C1 and C2 to access C1 and C2. And then you also add allowed between A1 and A2 to access C1 and C1 to C2. So to make things even easier and even a little bit more helpful for you, there's some convenience APIs, just to make your job a little bit easier. We've got some high DLL by name and handle. These things take a WCHAR or wide string Unicode, whatever you want to call it, name, or a load library base address handle for a DLL, and then some fake backing memory can also be null cloaked. And then hides that whole DLL, edits the module list for you, and will use the WinXP offsets in the module list to delete that thing from the module list. Because if you're working out a process, you probably want to work with the name instead of the handle version because of rebasing that could happen if you load library from a different process. Also, I should say this now, permissions don't really make sense to allow one PID to access the address space of another, because the only way you can do that is through the kernel, through a system call. So we also provide write hidden and read hidden APIs that allow you to access another process's hidden memory. So I mentioned that Shadow Walker doesn't really deal with race conditions, so that would imply that Tron does. So in fact it does with a little bit of help from the user. So basically the idea is you give you say before and after your hidden code is running, you have the option of calling change trust, which basically flushes the TLDs and will prevent job-based scanning from being able to detect you running on the same thread. So to visualize this, if you have a queue of jobs and you've got your cloaked code, that is going to happen in one job, and then you know that the scanner can come before or after you. You don't want the scanner to prime the TLD with the fake memory before you access it, and you don't want yourself to prime the TLD with the valid memory before the scanner accesses it. So you want a change of trust. You want to flush your TLBs before and after your code runs if you have a job-based system that you're dealing with. Also, there's the issue of inter-thread scanning as opposed to intra-thread scanning, where you could have a dedicated scanner thread that could happen. And as I mentioned earlier, context switches between threads do not flush the TLBs, so you need to do something about that. So basically, this API is provided. You give it the address of swap context from IDA in order to patch this task switch function in the NT kernel, in order to flush your TLBs always and not just on a thread or not just on a process switch. The reason why it's from IDA is because the NT kernel is rebased on occasion. So the IDA uses the PE headers, which are based at 400,000 and are constant, and then the Tron actually calculates the real base offset in order to patch this properly using the address that you give it. And this uses one of the APIs from librootkit that I'll describe in a bit. So miscellaneous tricks. As I mentioned, there's no cloaking, hooks. The system calls virtual query especially to lie about the virtual memory areas. The kernel also is not trusted. This is very important. You don't want your target app to be able to just reprocess memory on itself and be able to use the kernel instruction pointer to access trusted memory. So that's a key feature. That read process memory is going to give you fake memory. And then memory permissions are also enforced, the write, protect, and what have you. So there are some weaknesses to Tron. The first one really breaks my heart. I think it's the worst weakness, and that's the hidden code doesn't run in VMware. I want to call this a VMware bug. Because their IRET doesn't maintain the ITLB. It flushes the ITLB or its virtual copy of the ITLB upon return to userland code. This should be a perf bug. I mean, if there's a page fault happening in your code now, they've got to also do the translation for the code as soon as it returns as well, and get that back into the ITLB again. I don't know. I haven't submitted it to them. If there's any VMware people in the audience, maybe you could do me a favor. It would be really nice to be able to use VMware with this. But data hiding does work just fine. Also, it doesn't really crash VMware, or maybe it does if that'll motivate you guys to look at it. It causes a CPU hang, sort of. So that's VMware does remain responsive for the most part. So as far as detection, there's really only one major way I'm aware of, other than trying to probe the APIs to see if they behave differently, which we did try to take care of to the best of our abilities. Maybe we missed something, but hopefully the APIs should behave normally. The regular APIs I'm talking about, the read process memory, virtual query, write process memory, and so on. But this breakpoint verification is also possible. It's basically the same idea that you have when you're trying to detect a userland debugger normally. You set a breakpoint, you install an exception handler for it, you jump to the breakpoint, and if your handler doesn't run, you know that either a userland debugger is attached and absorbed the breakpoint exception, or something else strange happened. And in this case, something else that strange happened is Tron is presenting a fake view of your memory, and the breakpoint is being written to the fake memory as opposed to the actual code that's going to be executed when the code jumps to itself. So this only works if you're actually presenting memory as mapped. If you have null cloak memory that is invisible, then touching it is going to give you an access fault, and it's not going to be visible. Okay. So there's some room for improvement. Tron's not perfect. Not sure how much, if any, of this I'm going to do. Some of it is relatively easy. Like so, SMP and HT safeness is difficult, but probably a bit easier than 64-bit cleanliness at this point. Probably the easiest one on this list is making the API reentrant or thread safe. Right now, there's no locking on any of Tron's data structures. I just sort of depend on the fact that you're not going to be like running lots of crack copies of software on your system at the same time, or rather, more likely not debugging something that you also have hidden code in, but maybe that's possible. If that is happening, I don't know, try and get around it some other way, file system locking, or hey, write a patch, lock down the data structures for me, and I'll take it. Or if it bothers me, maybe I'll do it. We'll see. So far, it's not been an issue. Okay. There's also, I said, not 64-bit clean. There's a fair amount of 32-bit assembly. The whole page file handler is still assembly. A lot of that probably could be redone in C, actually. But also, you have to clear interrupts and some other nonsense. Clear the WP bit in assembly, so that at least has to be done. Also, I'm really sloppy about mixing G words and T voids. That's done all over the place. That has to be cleaned up. U-longs, too. They're all the same to me. So 64-bit, so 64-bit code is going to require that. Also, a patch guard break probably will be necessary, or you got to sit around with a freaking kernel debugger, or boot into safe mode, I think. That's not very much fun. So that has to be done. So optimizations, right now Tron, on every page fault, is going to search all of its hook tables. So a couple of ways you can improve that, considerable hit if you have a lot of cloaks, is if you borrow a bit from either the proto-PKE bit, which is used to do shared memory in the Windows kernel, or shared libraries in userland. That bit can be borrowed to try and hint at, or the reserved PKE bit you can try and hint that a PKE is cloaked at Tron, and only search your hooks in the event that those bits are set. So you still have to search your hooks in the event that faults to actual shared memory, but at least you'll eliminate some of them. If that reserve bit is available and not bug checked, you can actually eliminate almost all of them if they don't use that at all, but that's a big gamble. And these things, I think, are documented. These bits are documented in the ReactOS NDK. Has those filled out for you, so you can have a look at where they live, if you're curious. Also, making the hook arrays in task tables. It's just a linear search right now because I want things as simple as possible. At least make sure it worked. It's probably not too hard to turn it into a hash table, and you can verify it with the linear search for a while to make sure everything's sane. So that's doable. I may or may not get to that. I don't know. We'll see. Thoughts on PatchGuard. So I mentioned that PatchGuard actually enables a break of, or ShadowWalker to completely break PatchGuard, which is interesting. But first I want to kind of rant a little bit. I don't know. I don't think PatchGuard is the right approach, at least not the mandatory way that's being going about now. Unless things have changed, as far as I understand it, you need a kernel debugger attached in order to disable it. Possibly booting into safe mode, possibly not. I don't have x64 hardware, so I haven't been able to verify any of this. But it's basically going to lock out all custom kernel modifications. Anybody who wants to play with their kernel, and third-party scanners probably as well who want to hook system calls. Microsoft basically declared war on the good guys and the bad guys, I think, with this move. People who want to understand the kernel for drivers or whatever, who want to use the kernel for reversing other programs, or who want to do malware research to try and research which system calls malware makes, or who want to do the same thing with botnet research to try and see if they can detect, botnet infections or whatever, or the same worm, whatever. And then, reversing, as I said. All these people, they're all going to look for breaks, including the bad guys. And yet, legitimate antivirus is locked out. So it creates sort of a monoculture solution where you really need, it's just break once, break everywhere, one thing that you have to worry about. Instead of user land where there's multiple AV products and that malware writers would have to circumvent, now you just have one. One to figure out when to break. And the result of this is going to be a stability nightmare. All these machines are going to, they're going to be suffering from breaks. They're going to be bug checking all over the place. I don't know. We'll see. Time will tell on that one. But in any event, it turns out that this thing does provide a way to cloak your page fault handler, which in the case of Shadow Walker means that you cloak everything. Basically, the idea is, if you've read the uninformed.org paper on PatchGuard, they do have another break. This one is different from that. That was also very excellent work, very brilliant work by those guys. Very impressive. That's where I basically got this idea, since I don't have 64-bit hardware. Basically read their paper and thought of this. So the idea is, you mark the start point, which is the default handler. PatchGuard, at least the version they looked at, used the default handler to start things off. It had some moduli that it checked for. There was special random value, and that kicked off the PatchGuard scan. So you mark that non-executable, which is supported on your 64-bit CPUs. And then in your page fault handler, if your instruction pointer is equal to that default handler when it first starts, you prime your data table with a fake page fault handler copy that conceals your jump or whatever in the real page fault handler. And then you're gone. You should be ghost. This PatchGuard will continue to scan, and it'll use the global DTLB. There shouldn't be a context switch, and then you should be gone. Now, I could be wrong about this. Obviously, I haven't tested it, and there may be ways around it, but kind of short on time. Don't really like the system. Next slide, please. Yeah. Wait, I do that myself. All right. Okay, so ADHD. So ADHD is a debugger hider. Nice little graphic from the movie. Also, side note, probably another DMCA violation with these slides. Probably may or may not be fair use to use these images. I'm kind of going a bit overboard, but all you have to do is use NPlayer to play that DVD, and then you've got another DMCA violation, which is kind of nice. All right, so ADHD debugger detection. So you've got a few ways that a debugger can be detected on Windows. You have the process block that has a special flag being debugged that can be modified from userland to spoof. There's also a couple of library calls that check it. I believe they're both. The first one is a library call, and the second one I believe is a kernel call. But it can also be checked with a couple of lines of assembly. So hooking the kernel for this is not really an option, but you can bang that up from userland. Query information process is a system call. You query with a debug port property, and if it's non-zero, then you've got a debugger attached to that process. Otherwise, you don't. This one is really clever. There's this KhakiWares utility that sets a little bit of a jump in these two break-ins that are used for thread break-in. When you attach a debugger, it'll jump and alert it. And then you can check the parent PID, and this last one will allow you to prevent exceptions from being delivered to a thread. It doesn't really hide the thread per se. It just prevents exceptions from being delivered to the debugger for that thread. You've also got a couple other basic ones, more general. Again, that breakpoint verification or exception raising. You also have wall clock time, and you can check the window titles and running processes as well. So what does ADHD do about all this? ADHD resets that PEB flag. It zeroes the debug port. It protects the debug remote break-in from hooks. It restores them if it detects modifications. It does defeat KhakiWares anti-debug. Resets the parent PID if you've launched your process in a debugger to Explorer. It blocks thread high from debugger. There's no way to check to see if thread high from debugger actually succeeded, really, as long as your exceptions are being delivered. So just denying that thing outright just seems to be okay. ADHD it does have some weaknesses. The exception redelivery isn't handled. Basically, all your exceptions need to be redelivered by your user land debugger. IDA can do this for most exceptions. Also, time is an issue. Can't really hook those. They're done with shared memory now, probably for perf or timer resolution issues. There's a shared page between kernel and user that has the timing information that these guys actually read in most cases. So you can script your debugger. You can use clue or whatever for trace points. Also, there's no process and title cloaking, but you can use Futo, and the debugger plugin, IDA debugger plugin clue will do this as well. We'll spoof your titles. So, librootkit, for those of you familiar with the movie, this is Sark, and he's staring at what appears to be the kernel over there, I guess, and Pac-Man for some reason. He's running through the system, having some fun. Maybe that's what annoys him, I don't know. Alright, so noteworthy librootkit APIs. Basically, we've got you can hook a syscall. Platform OS independent with a name based on this guy Gareth had a rootkit.com post for something like this. I cleaned up the interface, made it a little bit cleaner. Also, the setup hot patch, which works kind of like detours. You basically give it a function you want to patch, a thing to jump to, a buffer to contain the resulting assembly to set up the jump back that you call from your target when you're done, and then the length of this. And it uses this guy Nick Cappen's x86 length decoder, very nice length decoder, very, very minimal. And it's also used by Tron to patch swap contacts. And there's an undo for this thing as well. And then these guys at the bottom, TB borrowing and channel table finding and setting interrupt vector or whatever. This TB borrowing is useful for looking up or for getting a user land pointer to give the system calls that you want to execute from the kernel. Clue is the IDA plugin. I think this graphic is kind of nice. This guy basically hooks your IDA is an IDA debugger plugin to set hidden software breakpoints with Tron. So you can set. So it's useful. So you don't have to just set your 4 hardware breakpoints. And worry about those and have to continually reset them. You can set as many hidden breakpoints now as you want. I haven't tried tracing yet, though. It's on the to-do list. Probably. It should work. The IDA debugger plugin API is unfortunately broken. There's 4 calls: add breakpoint, delete breakpoint, read memory, write memory, and a few others. But it never calls write memory. So had to use Microsoft detours to detour write process memory in order to hook it and do the writing to hidden memory to set the breakpoint. And it changes the IDA of Windows titles to random strings, kind of a little trick just to avoid detection. The warden, I believe, checks your window titles. And it is a form of detection for debuggers. So, talk setup. So first we tried to make the orange anonymous, and then once we made the orange anonymous, then we knew it was ready for a person. All right, that's it. No. So there's several components that went into this. And the first, on this side, we've got a ventricle client. We've got a voice changer, which is why I sound like some kind of metallic elf. It's not actually my real voice. We've got a VNC client as well for the connection to the virtual machine, and Tor, of course, to route everything over and make to obfuscate the IP address. So there's also a Linksys router involved, basically for a firewall and a little bit of range for 802.11. There's it could have just as easily been done with another VM on this side and a Linux host, or as we'll talk about in a bit, a complete Linux solution. And then a VM image to make things easier on Hikari, who was extremely helpful in setting this up. Of course, the whole con couldn't happen without this guy, and definitely this talk would not have happened without his patience with my random emails and insane demands. So props to him, and he's on that side is a VM image with a VNC server, some tools, and the slides, and Ventrilo server and client for voice. And then lastly, plenty of paranoia and fuck the man. These are both necessary components for this talk. All right, so local setup. 802.11, if you want to roll with that, find a coffee shop, hotspot, friend's apartment with open access point, whatever. Change the MAC address on the Linksys or your laptop, and put the thing in the client mode, supported by OpenWRT, VDWRT. Ventrilo has some UDP traffic that needs to be blocked. That's a reason for the Linksys or a Linux router ahead of you or whatever. And it also phones home, so you want to block that. So you basically want to block all but your Tor server traffic at the Linksys router. You want to, and then these two IP cables will do that. And then you need to configure your Tor RC a little bit so to allow yourself to build fast circuits to Tor, so you're not depending on just chaos to be able to get you a good link to wherever. And then then we add a tunnel VNC and Ventrilo over SSH-L. And there's a little echo script that lets me know that this thing is still live. That's printing out times as well. Okay, so here's the setup diagram of all this works. There's only one Tor circuit needed because we're actually multiplexing VNC and Ventrilo over SSH here. Because this is done both to make it easier for the Tor circuit and because they don't support proxy, so they think they're connecting to the local server. Also, in the event that data retention actually happens and is competent, which is a big if, there may or may not be a global adversary in the future, in which case you'll probably need to do some extra sketchiness, make sure this 802.11 network is not close to you, or set up additional fake flows with some of your friends into the Tor network. The big issue with the global adversary is that this talk is happening at a specific time. It has a relatively guessable traffic pattern, and it is going for a specific duration. This is very fragile to someone who's able to observe, say, the Backbone or Dan Kaminsky, for example. Could really ruin my day. So you have, on the other side, you have EVDO, and the EVDO line is basically what's the only network link on the display computer, and then there's a forwarded port to the VM image that contains everything that I need. So this thing is actually pretty mobile. It should be able to be done at just about any con. Well, presumably. I don't know if my voice is dropping like crazy or not over the EVDO. Has a little bit of packet loss, a little bit of extra latency that may or may not be a problem. Since Ventrilo is TCP, it is reliable. So I don't know, it may just manifest itself as crazy delays. Hopefully there hasn't been too much of that. VM can be Linux once the Ventrilo client is done. There's a lot of serial number and update issues with VMware or with running Windows on VMware. Basically, you have to somehow get a copy of Windows that doesn't have a serial number associated to you on it, and then you have to manage to update that so you don't get pooned during the talk, and do all that stuff without leaking any information about that image onto the net. That's very tricky. Linux would make things a lot easier and a lot, legally safer. I do have a license technically for this VM image. I've got a destroyed computer with a Windows XP home sticker on it still. That's my license for this guy, I'm going to say. So I think everything should be legit on that end, even still. But whatever. Anyway, so how do you build this custom Tor circuit? Well, there's this Tor control port that you set up with that option earlier, that 9051 option. You tell that to localhost 9051. It's just a couple of commands. You authenticate yourself. If you set a password, you got to provide it. And you subscribe to stream and circuit events. You need to build the circuit first, which is basically a route through Tor. You give it your path. This path can be any length. You can go crazy and make it like 100 nodes long or whatever. And then you get a circuit back to success status, and then when you make a connection to the Tor SOX proxy with like SSH or whatever, it tells you, there's a stream in. What do you want to do with this thing? Because you told it to leave it unattached. You then say you attach it, and then you're connected. You also have to watch this exit policy on this last node. All right, starting to run down to the bell here, I guess. But we're almost done, I think. So the documents and tools, all IDA copies are tagged, so like you don't want to ship any IDBs around. I think people are working on trying to make those, working on scrubbers for those. But the SDK appears clean. It appears to be non-unique for copies of IDA, so to build a plugin, you don't really have to worry about that. Your identity being leaked through your IDA copy. So OpenOffice is used for slides. Basically, the open document format is just a zip file with XML in it, easy to verify that there's nothing in there, and then even then it's converted to PDF, so maybe this doesn't matter. Microsoft also has a metadata tool, but I don't know. No thanks. Another license you also have to deal with in the event that you get owned. Goals try and break as few laws as possible, since this is a proof of concept and it may fail. Okay, so Windows Serial. Also, as I mentioned before, this auto patcher utility is great for updates for without having to worry about this thing talking to the Microsoft Update servers. There's also a proxy config option that allows you to set up a proxy for updates. You can use that as well. Auto patcher is just so much nicer, though. You just download it, and then come back and get it later, and then you can, if you screw up, you can just easily re-update later, reinstall and re-update later. DDK is free, but MS will only mail it, presumably to track sketchy people like me. But there are, obviously ways around that. Setup, and you also have to watch your symbol path in WinDebug so it doesn't query the symbol server for, tron.sys or whatever. You want it to search locally. And then all your research and stuff should be done through Tor. You don't want to issue a whole bunch of Google queries for all this shit from a single IP and Google cookie would be very bad. It's probably be one of the first stop shops for trying to figure out who had done this. I would guess maybe, probably. Good start anyways. All right, so anonymity. Believe it or not, this doesn't hurt quite so much as it looks. Basically, but there are some issues to this. It's easy to screw up. So even if you're technically sound and you do everything right, your friends who you try to either enlist for help and who had other commitments, or even those working with you, they may not be as careful as you. They might post to forums or /stop for their +5 karma points. To either defend your talker, to say, oh, yeah, I know that guy, or, post as anonymous coward or whatever, without, taking any other precautions to protect who they are. And then, repeatedly visit the con website, mention, brag that they know the speaker, from a work IP or an IP that reverse resolves to their name. That'd probably be another nice one that I'm sure can happen. And then these intersections, it may seem like this is kind of, overkill, but subtle intersections do add up. Even, like, buying a Linksys router is no big thing, but if you're already somewhat a suspect, you do have the skills to do this, and you did buy a Linksys router on your credit card or whatever, then that's a possible way that, things can go down. Or you ordered it online because you can't get the VxWorks ones anymore. That's another big problem. And then, mistake during talk setup testing. If you screw up, let something leak out during a test, or you discover something during a test that you've done wrong. That's a big problem. And then, basic other things, slide style, someone recognizing the way you lay out your slides, someone recognizing your code or commenting style, someone recognizing your stuttering, your ums, your whatever while you speak. That's another problem. And then from here, the man can go round up all your idiot friends who posted on the forums and give them a good rundown. I recommend that. I think that's a good idea. The guys could deserve a good talking to. Well, maybe that didn't happen. I don't know. I actually have no idea. They wouldn't tell me, I'm sure. Just think I'm crazy, which of course I am. So numerous downsides. There's no resume padding. Obviously, no PR whoring. So Greg Hoglund need not apply. Audience is, defined as the human element. You guys, I can't really hear you laughing, or not laughing or throwing things, throwing chairs. I don't really know. And so it's not optimal. So I have no idea if you're with me still, if I'm even still there. And also, I'm deprived of networking with others at the con. If I show my face, it's obviously probably problematic. And then if I fuck up, it just looks stupid. Or maybe the thugs will come and break your knees. Some folks from Blizzard or Sony or whatever roll out and get my knees broke. No thanks. So, closing thoughts. Is it worth it? What the hell? We're hackers. Yeah, we'll do anything once. It was fun, very exciting. Need to try and prove that you could do. Also helps to raise awareness of privacy-enhancing technology. Privacy may be dead or almost dead as a talk tomorrow. But as technically competent people, we can build and use tools that at least can try and ensure some level of privacy for the things that we want to keep private. I think Bruce Schneier had a blog post that, if you're taking a shit, there's nothing wrong with that, but you don't necessarily want to, have everybody watching you doing it, or, you're having sex or whatever. Private things, it'd be nice to keep some things private. And also in the case of civil disobedience or just in the interest of spreading information that would otherwise be censored, it's useful. Just to raise awareness of that. Not necessarily maybe the speech idea is a horrible idea, but it'd be useful. It'd be nice to be able to educate people, hopefully, about this idea. For just general communications. And then if we fail, we're relatively safe, I think, against the DMCA. We haven't really annoyed any particular corporations here. They're obviously the ones who rule this government. So I think we're pretty safe. And even if we were in trouble, the test case should be relatively easy to beat. And if we fuck up through other means, even still like social leaks or whatever, people can learn from it. And, for DM research or whatever, maybe some talks better than none. You could have a look at that Wikipedia entry to see. So, I guess that's pretty much it. A little bit over, but I started kind of late. So hopefully everything's all right. Here's my contact info. I'm going to try and be on IRC temporarily. I might be on no logins, Silk server a little bit longer. It seems like a nice place to hang out. I hope that's not a problem that I mentioned that. Probably going to be there for a little while as Alan Bradley. Probably only on Freenode maybe for today. And it won't be immediately. It'll be, as soon as we do the takedown over here and get someplace safe. Probably be on there. And then the talk setup paper is not written yet. We'll try and post that or a link to the Tor Wiki at a later date, maybe a couple weeks. So look for it there. And then Tron is not posted anywhere except for the TourCon website. Just finished, just put some final touches on it for the TourCon release just a couple days ago. So we'll put it up on OpenRC if they'll keep it. They should. It's not really that big of a deal. Hopefully. We'll see. All right. I guess if this thing is still working, I can try and take questions if the mic is working. Or we can try and do questions relayed over IRC. There is an IRC channel open between me and Hikari.
Yeah, since
he can relay, I guess.
Since we're running late on time, maybe we should just do questions on IRC.
There's probably not much room for questions, I guess. If we're running late, there's only 2 minutes left till the hour.
Apparently. Yeah. Let's. Why don't you just take the questions on IRC?
I don't know, whatever we're gonna do.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Is Torah still on?
Yeah.